Waste of the week simply is those documented through a nonpartisan process, those documented issues of waste, fraud, and abuse that occur through the spending, irresponsible spending and oversight of our bureaucracies here in Washington. Today, I'm highlighting two policies that have occurred within the State Department and the Federal Aviation Administration. I frankly could be talking about every agency in the federal government who has fallen prey to a lack of oversight, a lack of responsibility, to being victims of waste, fraud, and abuse, costing the taxpayer an extraordinary amount of money. We have come to the point where we've identified over these Waste of the Week speeches well over $150 billion of documented waste, fraud, and abuse. These are issues that have been raised through inspections and analysis by the Federal Accounting Office, by the various agencies, the inspector generals of these agencies, whose job is to delve in and find out how the taxpayer money is being spent. Is it being spent for the legitimate purpose of providing the service that is needed? Or is there a problem either in mismanagement or through waste, or are criminals and others taking advantage of the program? And I have documented, as I said, now 34 or 35 of those totaling well over $150 billion. Today we want to look at two agencies as examples of this. I could go through every agency, but we'll take two today. One is the State Department. Changing the policies here, it's estimated, could save the taxpayer $295.6 million. It's not small change. Just addressing these two agencies, problems that have been identified, $295+ million in savings. Let me go into a little bit of detail. State Department employees located overseas, those serving in embassies or consulates, have access to what is called a purchase card. And the idea here, the concept is okay, the idea here is that rather than go through all the paperwork and processing and sending back to the United States and look, we need some office supplies. We didn't order enough initially. We need to pick up 100 Scotch tape containers or pens or who knows what it is. A purchase card is given to those employees who are responsible for providing those supplies to make what is called simple transactions. Now, to prevent the wasteful use or fraudulent use of these purchase cards, federal law and State Department guidelines require that all transactions meet certain eligibility criteria and be continually monitored. We know from experience that mistakes are made. We know from experience that fraud is committed. Now, one of those key eligibility criteria is that all of the purchase receipts have to be retained for a minimum of 3 years. That's so inspector generals can go back and look at the purchases, look at the receipts, make sure everything's up to speed and done within the law. However, a recent report by the State Department Inspector General has revealed that overseas employees have been told that they don't have to send any purchase documentation to their supervisors in Washington for further review. All they need to do is keep the receipts of the purchases, the documentation of the purchases for a 3-year period of time, so that when those assessments are being evaluated, when someone comes back and says, we heard there's a problem here, they will have the receipts to verify whether the purchases were legitimate or not. That's the trust but verify that I think is important for dealing with these kind of situations. But when the State Department Inspector General tried to access the documentation for purchase card transactions as required by the law and by State Department regulation, he found that many of the overseas offices didn't keep their transaction records. As an example, in fiscal year 2014, the Inspector General found that more than half of overseas offices either didn't perform reviews as they were required to do of purchase card transactions, or didn't even respond to the Inspector General's request to produce the documentation. And the report determined that during the 2013 and 2014, there were $53.6 million in unaccounted purchases. Unacceptable. You take a job, you're told that here's your card. If you need to buy something locally and don't want to go through all the rigmarole of purchasing and sending overseas and so forth, you can use this purchase card. But you've got to keep the documents if you do this, because you're going to be reviewed. Someone's going to come over here and say, prove it. Yet the State Department has basically said, don't worry about it. You don't have to keep those. Probably thinking, well, they'll never come over and follow up on this. So that 53.6 million unaccounted for purchases, at this rate, over a 10-year period of time, is going to amount to about $263 million in unknown and unverified purchases just within the State Department's overseas offices. Who knows what's going on here? Secondly, I want to talk about the Federal Aviation Administration, because they have a similar situation that was inspected by their Inspector General. And he found that many employees did not comply with the guidelines, and the employees are not consistently held responsible for safeguarding their assigned equipment and supplies, like digital cameras, laptops, any number of other items. And as a result, the Federal Aviation Administrator, or IG, Inspector General, found that there are nearly, get this, 15,000 pieces of equipment and material that employees have not been able to locate. The combined value of that missing property is over $32.5 million. And to make matters worse, the IG report states that the FAA division that essentially lost $32.5 million worth of equipment doesn't even have the authority to hold employees accountable. Not a bad job, right? I mean, don't worry if you mess up, if you do something illegal, fraudulent, or you're just sloppy and not responsible, you don't know where the equipment is, you don't keep track of it, you won't have to be accountable for that lost equipment. Now, no American business could function this way and stay solvent. You walk back to an employee back there and say, well, what happened to the new laptop that we gave you 6 months? I don't know. I don't know where it is. I need another one. Oh, that's fine. Don't worry. This happens all the time. We'll give you a new one. And on and on and on it goes. Now, that division of the FAA essentially has lost $32.5 million worth of equipment. And again, doesn't even hold its employees accountable. Look, we have racked up nearly $19 trillion of debt in this country. $19 trillion. No one can explain how large of amount of money that is. What we do know is that we are continuing to plunge into debt, and that we're going to keep doing that. And one of the ways that we can be more accountable here is what I've just described. So with that, Mr. President, I know my time is running out. With that, I'm going to add this week to our accumulating waste through fraud, $295.6 million for these unknown, unverified purchases, bringing our total now to $157.5 billion. It's time to put a stop to this. It's time to enforce these rules and regulations. It's time to be sensitive to the fact that we are wasting taxpayer hard-earned dollars